Hello, and welcome again to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, integrity deficit disorder. We have as our guest today, Richard Villasana. Did I get that right?
You did.
Great. It's I practiced. And your book, he brought his book. He's got all those things in the book. It's Do No Harm, a best-selling book about the immigrant children separations and about the immigrant in this country's care crisis. Go ahead, tell us about it, Richard. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, we do have a crisis in this country, and we hear about it every day in the media about problems with immigration. The area I focus on was the crisis in 2017 that the U.S. government created by separating families, taking children away from their mothers and fathers, and separating those two out, and not having a game plan for how to put them back together. And I want to point this out. The United States has a process to track down, and this is mentioned in the book, watches, wallets, money, clothing, anything that someone comes and gives, just as you would see in those shows for at the police station where the person's leaving and they get their everything back that they came in with. But the government did not have a plan to track children. And that's why
When
we have this massive problem.
when was this done?
This was done in 2017. It was at the beginning of 2017 that the administration very quietly started a policy, and it was an informal policy, and that's very important.
Right,
The
right,
informality of this, called zero
right.
tolerance. And what they said is, we don't care how someone steps foot on U.S. soil. We will separate the children from their parents. And they knew they were going to do this. This wasn't something that happened by accident. People at the highest levels of government talked about this. And that's also covered in the book, where they were asked, do you understand what you're going to be doing? They said, yes. We understand the pain we're going to cause. We understand the message that we're sending to Latin America. Don't come. We don't want you. And so this policy was initiated and enacted and went on for about a year until March, April, when they formally declared that this is our policy. And that's when the ACLU stepped in, went to court, actually here in San Diego, and got an injunction against it because the judge ruled that the United States government had violated the Fifth Amendment of due process. They said, you got to stop this.
And did they?
No, they slowed it down, but
Right.
honestly, no, they did not. What they did do is put out an executive order on the 20th of June saying, we will reunite these families. And the numbers have been all over the place. And again, this is something that it's hard for, maybe, someone like you to understand, is that you may have heard numbers like, we have 1,000 families we haven't found. Oh, now we've got 2,000 families we haven't found. Oh, we're down to only 13 families.
Right.
The numbers have been all over the place. And some of that is by accident. Some of that is because over the years, up until 2021, some families, the government said, you know what, they should be included. Now, we shouldn't have separated them. Then others, they were removed out. And we see this kind of activity where we see people from Venezuela came in, and then the government decided, we really don't want you to stay here. We want to have you stay in Mexico. But they might invite people from the Ukraine and give them a little bit more preference. So we see this movement back and forth. It's not a finite number, but over the years, the number has become more than 5,000 families where the children have been separated. And for some of these children, it is now going on to 6 years And one of the things that I know, having done this work of reuniting these families, some of those kids were as young as 6 months old. I know this,
Really
and I know there's others younger, but me, with my own experience, I know 6 months is the youngest child that we worked on.
interesting. I had made a point here to get a fantastic answer. Why is foster care system still failing? And the system, it has nothing to do with it. Is that right?
That's a great question. So here's why in the book I talk about foster care,
Uh-huh.
because what's happening with the immigrant children is the federal equivalent of foster care. Children come in, they get separated. The government then has an organization called the ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, and they are a non-justice, non-policing entity. Their job is to take care of the children. So that essentially is our federal foster care system. Now, once those children go through their process, just like in foster care, they get teamed up with a sponsor, which is a fancy word normally for a mother or father who is already in the country, could be an aunt, uncle, family friend, could be an adult cousin, and the child is placed with them. So they do the vetting and they place the child with them. Great. Now, the problem is that person that the child has been placed with, the sponsor,
Mhm.
mostly is undocumented, doesn't have a
Mhm.
full-time job, doesn't have a secure job, is at the mercy of who's ever, they're renting from. So if rents go up, we all know there's inflation here. We're all feeling some hurt to the pocketbook. These people are the most vulnerable. They are at poverty level at best. They
Sure.
don't have health insurance. Anything can happen. They've got kids now, at least one child. And we know kids have a way of getting hurt, having things happen. All of
Right.
that comes together. All the issues that people in poverty experience are happening now with these children. And guess what? When poverty kicks in, the agency that steps in to protect those kids from neglect, abuse, is the foster care system. Because now they are now in the civilian society.
Right.
So now we have immigrant kids who are ending up in foster care. And we have a foster care system that is seriously lacking in ability to handle anyone who doesn't speak English. So there's a quote from one of the officials in Illinois, and Illinois has one of the largest numbers of Latino kids in this country.
Right.
And the comment was simply, I can understand if we were talking about Mandarin, but we're talking about Spanish.
Right.
There is no excuse for not being able to handle people who speak Spanish. And they're right. There is no excuse when you got 60 plus million people who are Latinos in this country, and we don't give them the paperwork required by law. We don't have the staff required by law. We don't have anyone who can speak Spanish to them. And now you got immigrants coming in who speak indigenous languages, on top of the fact that we had a COVID crisis that killed thousands of grandparents who are no longer taking grandkids, thousands of parents whose kids may or may not now be living with relatives. We came through a 2-3 year disaster, and now we've got this on top of it.
Well, that's amazing. Um, Something like that is not good, and I would think that a lot of people would agree with that. That's not good.
Oh, it's a terrible situation, and it's almost a perfect storm. We have all these immigrants coming up, and we have our
Mhm.
Congress has been kicking it down the road for years. There are many missteps that the government has made
Right.
in dealing with immigration at its root. And when I
Right.
say at its root, that these people are coming up from Central America for the most part. Now, that has changed a lot. Just FYI,
Right.
the government has said recently we have got people coming in from more than 100 countries.
Sure. You bet.
That's a huge shift
It
of
is.
this variety of people coming up. But a vast majority not say a vast majority outside of Mexico, Central America, now South America coming up, but Central America in particular. U.S. government backed out. We stopped
Right.
funding them
Right.
back in the 2016, 2020.
Right.
Anywhere from 2 to 3% of their budget. Now, you take out 2 to 3% of your budget. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that could be a little pain. And we're not down there. We're not actively, aggressively trying to reassert ourselves down there to provide aid and resources. And yet, this is a policy that we'll do that just came out recently that the US government said we'll send aid down to Venezuela. Why? We want to stabilize the situation down there. We want to keep people at home. Haven't seen that lately in Central America. Well,
Right.
we've got this divided Congress. They get it right sometimes, and they aren't getting it right at all when it comes to Central America. Because, look, we are essentially the Emerald City. This is where everyone in Oz is going to, because this is where it's at. And
Right.
if we don't do something in Central America to help those people, to help keep them there, well, this is just going to keep happening. So the wall by itself is not the answer. Better immigration policies would be the answer, and it's got to be a multifaceted response. Can't be a one size fits all. We all know that doesn't work. So we've got to do much, much more when it comes to that.
That's again, that's amazing that could still be on the way like this, like it is. It's not changed at all. Gotten
Well,
worse.
let me pull this down into something even more kind of palatable here. So let's take some of the
Okay.
cases I've worked on.
All right.
We had a case where we got the name of a parent. They gave us one other identifying piece of information, and they gave us the name of the country. So this would be like me finding John Smith, and someone says, John Smith, and he's this tall, and he lives in the United States. Good luck. That was all the information we got. Now, I should let you know, though, we did close the case.
Right. That's good.
But took a lot of work to do that
So
because we had to figure out how to work around that little information. But this is one of the reasons this reunification has taken so long, because we weren't there at the beginning.
right.
We weren't brought in until 2021. And we've been working these cases for the last 2 years. And the government is, in my opinion, not doing this well because they're doing this very cost consciously. You don't have a disaster and then tell people, you know what, we're going to hold back and see how things go, and we'll see you in about a month. And if that didn't
Yeah.
work, then we'll give you some more aid.
Right.
But that's what the government has
Right.
been doing now for almost 6 years. They've held back monies because they said, look, we're going to go try to find everyone in the US. We're going to find undocumented people who aren't
Right.
registered, who aren't sitting at a regular address. We're going to see if we can find them. And as you might imagine, they got about a 30% success rate on that. And then they came to us and said, well, okay, maybe we should try finding the parents in their country of origin.
Right.
Good idea. And we have been doing that, closing those cold cases. And here's the benefit side of that. We have been finding addresses for people in the US. So guess what? The government could go contact them. Here's a cell phone number. Oh, they moved. They've gotten married. Let me give you their information. It has nothing to do with our work, but our work has been so successful. We've been able to close cases where the parent was not where they thought they were. They were not in Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala. They were living in Georgia or New Jersey or California, and we've been able to tell the government, this is where they are.
For sure. Are they taking it in a way, a positive way, like that we're going to do something, we're really going to take care of it, or is it go away kind of thing?
They are, it is in motion. And to be fair, there are a lot of moving parts. So for instance, a year ago, if we'd wanted to bring up all these families from Guatemala, we couldn't have done it because Guatemala did not have enough passports to produce to give to these families, even if they had found everybody. That was a problem. Imagine that, a country that doesn't have enough passports, and the process of getting an official passport is not something you do and you get it printed at FedEx and you get the next day. No, this is something that takes months to get these official documents because they're priceless. And to get those so that the government could then turn around and give these passports to these families because they have to come up here legally. Everything has to be set up now to bring them to the US to be reunited with their child.
Right.
All has to be done formally. So you've got an organization that's working with them down in their home country. Then they're going to fly them up to the US, make that reunification process happen. So you've got US nonprofits, you've got a nonprofit like ours and others who are working to locate the parent in the first place.
Right.
And all this takes time. And it's frustrating that it takes time, but I'll give you, for instance, there was a family where they were remote, just
Right.
poverty level. We're talking dirt floors.
Mhm.
I think they may have had some electricity, but I think mostly it was lanterns. They go out, they gather water, they bring it into a local cistern to hold it for the community. We're not talking indoor plumbing and microwaves, nothing like this.
Right.
And so these people had to be brought into a city, brought to a place that would do passports. And in one case, they weren't able to do the whole family, so they had to go back, then bring them back the next week. And then they got to process that. Plus, they all the paperwork that they have to go through, plus having the personnel. And these countries, it's not like they're rich to
Mhm.
begin with, and they've got this burden of them or another international nonprofit working to put all this together, and they're stressed and
Mhm.
strained,
Right.
and so they're doing the best they can, but it may not be the fastest.
Right.
And then to get them up to this country reunited, and then the story, it's not like Cinderella. Actually, let me share this with you. You may have heard this, but this is like someone talked about a Western and said, there's the bride and the hero, and they're going off into the sunset. And everyone's like, oh, that is so nice. They said, what you don't know is the story 4 hours later, the bride's like, oh my God, I cannot believe this buckboard. This wood bench is killing me. Couldn't have brought a pillow. Now they're bickering and fighting. And the guy's like, I can't believe I shot those two guys just to get this woman. Oh my goodness, I can't wait till we get to the ranch. And that's a funny story, but it's very sadly accurate for these families now that are reunited.
Right.
There's not a lot. It's not like the government said, I'm going to reunite you with your child. And here's a bag of money to help you get started. Or here's a job for you to go into so you can start earning money. Or here's papers so you can go work. No, I know of a family right now that they were told it's going to take them 5 months to get the legal papers so they can legally work. Can you imagine not being able to work legally for 5 months? And now you've got your family.
No.
We got
Yeah.
no food. We didn't give you a place to stay. You don't have clothes. Oh, you got to get shots for your kids so they can go to school, but you don't have the cash to get the shots that are required to get your kids into school, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So is this a wonderful resolution we came up with? It's okay. But
Yeah.
it certainly has stressed a lot of these families. And that's without the realization that some of these families will never be together. I know of fathers who went through everything, had, separated from their children. Now they've brought their wife up and the family's together, and the wife decides, you're not good enough for me. I have this
Really.
great life here. I'm still young, and the kids are gone. And the
Hmm.
husband's alone. Or
Right.
the mother or father shacked up with someone, or the kids were depressed and they turned to drugs, which they never had
Right.
access to in their own country.
Sure.
All these things. I mean, there are a number of families that will never be made whole, even if they are, quote, together. So it's just a humanitarian disaster, and it's still ongoing.
Is Tijuana involved in is or taking any responsibility in terms of um, those kids?
Tijuana, many of the cities along the border are involved. As far as responsibility, it is really important to note that the US government is not going to the government in Tijuana and saying, look, we want you to keep thousands of parents here, and here's a bag of money to pay for it.
Wow.
It's more like, you really need to do this because we're the US and we could really make it difficult for you for people to cross back to go do tourism in your state and in your city. Don't think the US is not strong arming these people along the border because they know, and this is something most people in the US don't get, because no one in the US is going to print that,
Mhm.
that they're strong arming these countries who have much lower economies. I'm not going to say weak economies. They just have less economy than the US. And basically say, we have a nice relationship. You want that to keep going, you're going to do this favor for us. You're going to keep these families. And you just try to make sure you do it right. But we're not going to give you any financial help.
Huh.
And so the US has dumped their problem onto these countries, just as we expect Mexico to stop all these people coming up, but we can't stop them from coming in here. We are the most richest country in the world. If we
Right.
can't do it, how is it we expect some other country that has a 10th or a 12th of our economy to afford to do that?
Right.
But we do. And no one
Right.
blinks an eye at this. But this is reality. If we can't do it, then what makes anyone think that these other countries can do? Let's take Guatemala.
Mhm.
The economy for running the city of New York is larger than the economy of Guatemala. That's what we're talking about here.
Mm.
So there's this great disconnect because unfortunately, most of the people in the media, they talk around a problem, but they're not experts on
Right.
culture. They're not experts
Right.
on international business or
Right.
marketing or politics.
Mhm.
And so what you're hearing here, you probably never heard any of this, have you?
No, I haven't.
And that's a shame. It's a real shame because people is, you know, we all want to be educated. We all want to know, but there's just no one telling us this.
Well, maybe I assume you have people involved in changing the government's minds in a way, or is it just flat?
As far as changing the government's mind on the federal side, no, it is pretty flat. When it comes to foster care, we do have a team right now that are looking at some of the laws, looking at ways that we can put more accountability in. There are three things I always say that we need to help change the
Mhm.
foster care system.
Mhm.
And whatever happens here at the county level could easily be incorporated on the federal side. Because if it's happening on the federal side, trust me, it's happening locally. If it's
Right.
happening locally, it's happening on the federal side. Government is government. So to
Mhm.
answer your
Sure.
question, there's three things. One, we have to have adequate budgets. It's just
Right.
that simple. We don't have adequate budgets to handle the children in foster care. It's not a sponge. We just can't keep putting children in and expecting wonderful results. Results cost. Time is money. And yet, as a country, we say that children are one of our most important resources, but we don't act like it because we don't spend like it. Well, that's number one. There's got to be budgets there to handle the children and to take care of their needs properly.
Mhm.
Then number
Mhm.
two, it has to be training. That's one of the biggest problems we have in foster care. We have people coming in who get anywhere from an hour video training on how to handle traumatized children, how to make decisions on whether we remove a child from a home or not. Some places it might be 2 weeks, but think about that, 2 weeks. I worked with a cable company years ago. I got 8 weeks of training. And that was just so I could sit on the phone and tell someone, you know, if you punch these buttons in, you'll be able to get USA TV and HBO. This is so much more important, but people don't get more than 2 weeks at most of training. And they don't hear about what I do, which is locating the relatives. That's a whole other conversation. But so we've got lack of training at all levels. And then finally, we have to have accountability. We have so many things going wrong with the foster care system because no one is keeping an eye on them. No one's watching where the money's going from the federal
Right.
level to the
Right.
county level. No one's seeing how they're spending it at the county level. And that money is not being spent well,
Mhm.
and there's not enough of it. So you put those two together, you have a crisis. And we have a crisis across the country. We are lacking foster parents, we are lacking trained staff, and we are lacking accountability to stop the most egregious problems and violations of laws that are leading to deaths of U.S. children who are in foster care, who are dying
Mm.
across this country while supposedly they are being protected in a safe harbor by the government. But that's not happening either. So those are 3 things that have to happen on the foster care side of this.
Right. Well, just told myself that I feel like I've just been blown away, you know? The situation is just blown away. It's like, what has happened here? And the little ticker in my mind is, what are you going to do? How do you make it happen? But then you're doing it, and it's difficult. What you're doing? You're a pro at this, probably doing a very good job. I just don't know what to say.
It can sound hopeless. So let me put some hope into this because nothing happens without hope. Nothing
Right,
happens without action. That's really what we're talking about here. So people can take action. People ask me all the time, how can I help a foster child?
right.
Find a nonprofit. You could support Forever Homes for Foster Kids. We have reunited thousands of families over 3 decades. We make it happen. We get children back to their families out of the foster care system.
Mhm.
But it doesn't have to be us.
Right.
There's lots of nonprofits who are doing really good work. There may, you might be thinking, wow, I'd like to help foster teens who are aging out. If there
Mhm.
was a transitional program to take them in and to give them some help before we put them out on the street, great, go for it. They're local. I want to ensure that these foster kids go to college. There's a nonprofit for that. There's a nonprofit for pretty much anything. I want to help the kids who are being sexually abused. There's a nonprofit for that. We just have to look around, and we can help in 2 ways, either with our time or with our money.
Right.
We can donate. And one thing that a lot of people could do that they don't do is they could talk to their company. A lot of companies, if they had employees coming up and saying, you know what, I think we should be taking care of children. What can you do about that? I'll pay you to donate 2 hours a month.
Mhm.
I will donate $1,000 to your favorite nonprofit or something else. There's always something that people can do. We just have to think a little bit outside the box. And I have a list. So
Mhm.
anyone who wants to know what they can do, and the book has a full chapter of all the ways they could help us, but those same ways will help another
Right.
nonprofit. So,
Well, tell my listeners where they can find the book and all this
well,
information is.
the book is Do No Harm. It is on Amazon.
Right.
And if you just put in do no harm, and if you want to find it quickly, put my name in there, Richard Villasana. And that's Villasana. Put that in there. The Kindle right now is 99 cents. There's no
Mm.
reason for anyone who cares about foster kids not to get the Kindle version for 99
Right.
cents. If you want to get the paperback, I highly recommend that. If you're into foster care, the second half of the book is all about foster care.
Right.
If you're interested in what's been happening with these immigrant children, the first half of the book talks about that and then bridges it over into how these kids are ending up in foster care.
Mm.
But we address all the terrible things that are happening in foster care, but also that message of hope. There are wonderful stories of reunifications and families have been made whole, and then what you can do about it at the lowest levels that will take you a minute to 2 minutes,
Right.
such as
Sure.
fundraising,
Sure.
all the way up to becoming a foster parent or adopting a child. There's something in there for anyone who wants to help a foster child.
Well, I have to think that my listeners um, are thinking about this, what they've just heard. And I think that they'll probably react to something positive with respect to what you outlined. Um, in the meantime, I want to thank you again to um, display something for me, was completely unaware of that. Now I know, or at least now I know some of it. And uh, that's that's why you're here, and you're spreading the right and lots of integrity. I can tell you that. Um, so let me see what else I have on my list. I don't think I have enough time, but I will go ahead and do my. Yes, here. Oops. I'll have to thank my listeners to come again, searching for integrity. And so long, and happy trails to all when we meet again. Thanks a lot.